Nosso próximo painel reúne um time de experts para debater privacidade, proteção de dados e a experiência da Comunidade Europeia com a GDPR. Um tema que tem gerado muitas discussões e exigido a implementação de novas práticas nessa sociedade movida a dados. E para começar o painel, chamamos ao nosso palco CHRISTINA Montgomery. Por favor, venha para cá. Ela é vice-presidente e líder global de privacidade da IBM. Em sua posição, CHRISTINA supervisiona o programa de privacidade, a conformidade e a estratégia da IBM em âmbito global e dirige todos os aspectos das políticas de privacidade da IBM, incluindo o Conselho de Ética na área de inteligência artificial. Muito obrigada, bem-vinda. Se quiser sentar já em algum lugar, fica à vontade. Que bom. Convidamos também CORINNA SCHULZE. Está por aqui já? Opa! Pode vir para cá. Diretora de Relações Governamentais da SAP. Diretora de Relações Governamentais na SAP, na União Europeia, e de Assuntos Globais Corporativos. E também convido Tony de Boss. Por favor. Sócio e líder global de privacidade e proteção de dados da consultoria UI, que irá nos atualizar com base em todo o conhecimento que acumulou ao longo dos últimos anos, lidando com o assunto na Europa, Oriente Médio, Índia e África. E para ocupar o seu lugar de moderador, teremos THOMAZ, CORTE Real. Advogado, sócio do escritório M.A. Santos Corte Real e Associados e consultor jurídico da ABES. Excelente painel para vocês, para todos nós.
Olá, boa tarde. Primeiro, eu queria agradecer à diretoria da ABES por essa oportunidade. Sinto-me muito honrado de estar aqui moderando esse painel. E falamos de dados a manhã inteira, o dia inteiro, e agora temos que falar como proteger esses dados e regulamentar a implementação tanto das empresas globais em GDPR, quanto aqui nas empresas brasileiras na LGPD. Agradeço a presença dos 3 líderes aqui globais em privacidade e proteção de dados, Tony, CORINNA e CHRISTINA. Espero teremos um painel muito interessante, com várias experiências e conhecimento de vocês, trazendo da Europa nas questões do GDPR, do DPO, DPIs e de outros assuntos relevantes de privacidade e proteção de dados. Eu queria, antes de passar a palavra para o Tony, já que hoje nós estamos lançando também nossa plataforma de diagnóstico da LGPD, queria fazer um diagnóstico aqui da nossa plateia, para passar a palavra para os nossos palestrantes, para eles saberem mais ou menos do nosso público aqui. São 3 perguntas, só levantar a mão para a gente conhecer um pouquinho da nossa plateia. Quem aqui já leu, teve conhecimento, quando eu falo conhecimento, leu o Regulamento Europeu de Privacidade? Tá. Quem aqui já leu, teve conhecimento da Lei Brasileira de Proteção de Dados? Que legal. E quem aqui, qual empresa, já começou a implementar a LGPD nas suas empresas? Só para lembrar para vocês que faltam 10 meses para a nossa lei entrar em vigor, e o tempo urge, né? Passa muito rápido, e as boas práticas, governança, devem ser implantadas o mais rápido possível. Vou passar a palavra agora para o Tony de Boss, que vai trazer para a gente um pouco da experiência dele no GDPR, alguns casos práticos, e com aplicações de multas na Europa, e acredito que nós vamos aproveitar muito essa apresentação. A palavra é sua, Tony.
Yeah, thanks for this invitation. 20 minutes of introduction from my side, and we're going to do 4 things in those 20 minutes. First, talk a bit about why privacy is important. 2, I'll explain what happened in Europe when GDPR was live and it impacted Europe in a great deal. and explain a bit about that. Then I will highlight two important fines in Europe. With a lot of money involved, and what the background was of those two fines. And I will share 5 lessons learned from my practice helping clients across Europe and across the globe. But first we'll start with the video, and before we kick off, I typically use a video from 2006. It's about somebody ordering a pizza. And all the privacy challenges back then in that video of 2006 are still really relevant for nowadays. The video is 14 years old and it's still really real for now. But there was also recommended this video to me, which I think also explains really well why privacy is important.
Maria, pode entrar. Maria, o seu currículo foi o melhor currículo que chegou para a vaga que a gente está oferecendo. Você tem uma ótima experiência profissional, mas nós não vamos poder te contratar. Quem sabe, numa próxima oportunidade.
Essa cena não faz sentido. Para entender melhor essa história, teremos que voltar um pouco no tempo.
Boa tarde. Tem cadastro? Dá desconto. Dá seu CPF?
Foi aí que eles me pegaram. O meu CPF serviria para rastrear tudo que eu compro ou deixo de pagar. Eu não tinha a menor ideia que essas informações poderiam parar nas mãos do meu entrevistador. Você tem bastante experiência e é bem o perfil que estamos procurando. Foi o que ele me disse antes de não me contratar. Afinal, quem vai querer contratar uma mulher que pode estar grávida e ainda por cima mergulhada em dívidas?
O Congresso está prestes a aprovar uma lei para o uso de dados pessoais por empresas e pelo poder público.
Isso pode te proteger ou te deixar ainda mais desprotegido. Participe desse debate. Acesse direitosnarede.org.br.
I often have discussions about why is privacy important, and especially with the young guys and girls saying, well, why is it important? And it's convenient, and I also heard the previous speaker about his 8-year-old daughter, which said he wants to follow it. But I believe that there is a border for each and everyone in this room, where you say, this is still acceptable, and this is not acceptable for me. There is a line where you say, you cross the line, it's no longer acceptable. The video is an example of that. And everyone has this border where they say, I don't want to cross this. And that's why we need this privacy regulation to help us protect against data being misused and data being used in the wrong way. And that's also why we've got the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. It's now in effect more than a year, and it had a huge impact in Europe. So this slide is from, oh, we need to go back. Because we're already in the breach. Got another one here. Yep. So this is a slide from the EAPP, which shows what happened in a year. They believe that there are more than 500,000 DPOs in Europe. At least there are 375,000 registered DPOs in Europe. There are more than 280,000 cases with data protection authorities, 144,000 complaints, 89 notification of data breaches. Probably that's way too low, but still that's a lot. And millions and millions in fines. And it's not strange that we've got those fines, because the regulator in Europe, it was like a dog which could bark but not bite. They did not really have the power to issue big fines. And if you look at some of the other regulators, they really had the capacity to issue huge fines. And I think the privacy regulator always felt a bit, well, not really taken serious. And that was for sure with the client, with my clients. They said, well, Tony, what will happen? I will get a fine of 5,000 euros. Okay, maybe not nice, but I will pay and I will move on. That now all changed. And they want to show that they have their teeth and that they can bite. And that resulted at least in a number of fines in Europe. And I will go into detail about 2 of those fines. The first one is around data breach with Marriott, which is a huge one and was also quite extensive in the news. What happened? Marriott bought Starwood in 2016. And in 2018, so 2 years later, they found out that the reservation system of Starwood was hacked. It's a quite interesting story to read, because there were all kinds of signs, and they still didn't believe that they were hacked and data was extracted. But at a certain point of time, they really find out that there was a remote access tool on the system, and data was extracted out of the reservation system. Interesting enough, it already happened in 2014. So 4 years before they detected it, the hacker was already in the system and have been in the system for 4 years. And they find also evidence that data was extracted from the system, and later on the files were deleted, but forensic investigators still find the traces of those files and what was actually extracted out of the reservation systems. Which included a lot of personal data, passports, and a lot of privacy-related information. Interesting enough, there are 2 lessons learned from this one. First of all, privacy is sure, and we'll talk about it, and others probably will talk about it, is about your register of processing activities, your privacy impact assessment, about how you handle access requests when somebody sends you a request. But it's also about data protection and cybersecurity, and making sure that your data protection is at an adequate level. So don't forget that. And 2, they bought Starwood. And it was not an excuse to say, well, we bought the company in 2016. What happened before is not relevant for us. So if you want to buy a company, you not only need to look at the financial balance sheet and other stuff, but you also need to look at the applications and whether they are actually adequately protected. Because something will wrong, it will be your problem. And the other one, interesting enough, is also about the data breach, which is about data about British Airways. So what happened here? They've got this website, and your website you could book a flight to Brazil, for example. And if you wanted to pay for that flight, you were redirected to a rogue website. And that rogue website collected all your personal data, credit card, CCV numbers, also travel data, and they collected quite a lot of that data in, I think it lasted 2 years. Again, the message from this one, the regulator was saying you need to protect your data adequately. And that's not only the data, but it's your websites and your applications and everything. So privacy is not, again, only about the legal and the grounds of processing, which is really important, and the contracts and the transfer if you transfer data across the borders, it's also about data protection and making sure your cybersecurity is at an adequate level. Is it strange that those, and if you look at most of the fines, they are relating to data breaches? Do you think that's strange? No, probably it's not strange that those data breaches resulted in a fine, because those are the most easy one. I mean, if a regulator would not respond to this one, you would say, well, that's crazy, I'm not taking you very seriously. Well, there are other fines, and there is already one about your used data, but there was actually no ground to use the data, and related fines, for sure, they will follow. And the French regulator already started with a fine, but I think it's also a bit political or French-related around Google, that they were not transparent and they didn't find the consent and how that was provided really adequate. So that's quite interesting that those fines are related to data protection. Well, we have two other speakers, and they will share a lot of more lessons learned in the past 2 years, but I want to at least share 5. Data protection, whether it's GDPR or the LGPD, it's not only about lawyers and legal people, about compliance people and cybersecurity people. It will impact the whole organization. And interesting enough, if you look at cybersecurity, it's often in the technical side. It's the IT people and the security guys and girls which are working on that. And the business say, well, it's not, it's all fine for me if you manage that. But that's not the reality with privacy and data protection. If you look at a privacy impact assessment, the business need to complete that. And they need to find out whether what they want to do with the data, whether the rights of the data subject are taken into consideration. And the DPO can help you with that, but the business, the HR, they need to do the work and they need to understand what they do with the data. And that also results in a multidisciplinary approach, and also results in that the governance is quite complex. And again, if we look at Europe, the DPO is just helping you. Interesting enough, I tend to say it's a sheep with 5 legs, because he needs to understand the law, he needs to understand cybersecurity, he needs to help everybody to fill in the privacy impact assessments and to complete the records of processing activities. And if it's not going right, he needs to escalate to the board and say, I'm not really happy. I think it's a quite complex position, but maybe some of the speakers will explain more about how that works in reality. 2, you need to follow a data-driven approach. So often clients start, I'm going to look at this application and that application, and it turns out there's a lot of assessments of application. But the challenge is, you need to follow how your data is flowing through your organization. How the data was collected, flowing from one application to another, to a vendor and back. Because often what we see in those data flows, that the reason why the data was collected at the beginning is not in line with what the data was shared with a vendor, or later on used for do some great analytics or artificial intelligence stuff. So look at your data flow and use that as a base to start documenting and performing privacy impact assessment. 3, GDPR got a lot of attention in Europe, and everybody is nowadays a GDPR expert. And it leads to some interesting situations where people are saying, well, you need to remove my data, because that's my right. Well, interesting, if you do it on if you do the processing based on a contract, there are 2 ways. Either you stop the relation, you do nothing, or you cannot remove the data for this person. And you end up in often quite interesting discussions with data subjects that they want to execute the rights. If you look at data access requests, I always tell my clients to look at few things, or at least follow this checklist. If I get an access request, first of all, find out whether it's a journalist. Sometimes journalists want to test whether you're ready to handle those access requests. 2, find out whether it's some kind of smart consultant, because they want to sell work and they send this access request to say, well, are you really in control? And 3, interesting enough, make sure that it's not an unhappy client. Because what we've learned, for example, working for an automotive company, that if a data subject was not happy with the color of the car, interesting enough, they would send in a data subject request. Tell me which data you're processing. And another example where 2 companies were merging, they overflooded the legal department by access requests on how much data is being processed by me as an employee. Because they were all concerned about being laid off as a result of the merger. So the instrument is also used in different ways than just to execute the right in the regulation. So you need to understand they're quite savvy. 3, I already said that if you want to use, and we actually see it now with a lot of my clients, they want to do great things, and the previous speaker already showed a lot of things. But you need to make sure that if you want to use the data later on, that the moment you capture the data, you make sure that it's able to do what you want to do later on. Not only the primary process, but also the secondary process. So if there is just a contract to execute some kind of insurance policy, the things you can do with the data, when there is still personal data in it, is really limited. If you want to do more, you want to make sure, for example, to get a consent, or maybe do a reconsent, because the consent which was there was not really adequately. So if you start looking at those data flows, it also would be good just to understand not only your primary process, but also understand what you want to do later on. And start thinking about it, should I change my process? Should I change my contract? Or should I change the way I ask for a consent? And the last one is, don't only focus on implementation. Clearly, you need to have a process, and you need to have a policy. But what I saw with my clients, so in June they were all ready. They did a few months, during summer they relaxed a bit. A lot of implementation work before May. And then I came to them in September and they saying, Tony, I simply don't know how to manage this. What are my key risks? How do I understand that in an ongoing way? So don't only focus on your implementation, but also make sure how you create an ongoing process to monitor and update what's there. And we believe that you need a tool to do that. I will not spend a lot of time on this slide, but we're trying to help clients with a tool and the experience we've got from GDPR and get that for them so they can actually start managing their privacy risks. And I want to close with one thought, because we're talking about regulations and what you're allowed to do and not to do. But I believe that you, as every company, needs to think about their data ethics. Because I believe you can do a lot based on the law. But the question is whether you still want to do that as a company. And let me give you an example to illustrate that. I've got a client which built an algorithm which can easily tell you whether you will be in financial problems in 3 months' time. And it's quite easy to understand. I mean, if I'm a man and I've got a family, I'm going to a virtual gambling site, I can see that in the payment data. And if I go there first every month, then every week, and then every day, maybe I've got a gambling problem. And if I then run into financial problems, that might impact the family. And we know if you look at gambling problems, it often is a social problem. So with the knowledge that you are the bank, and with the knowledge that there is a problem, and that they will be in big financial problems in 3 months' time. And there might be a gambling problem. What is the thing you're going to tell to your client? Are you going to call them, say you have a financial problem? Is there any responsibility as a company to say about the gambling problems there are, which is a social problem? So I think there's a lot to think about. If we think about all those great, and I really love technology and innovation, so don't say that I'm a really negative guy, but if you do all those great things, you also need to define as a company where you draw the line. And you need to define your ethics on what is acceptable and not to do as a company. And with that, I will hand over to the next speaker.
Obrigado, Tony. Excelente apresentação. O Tony trouxe alguns números aqui para nós que...
I need to translator.
Ok. I wait. Thank you. O Tony trouxe alguns números aqui para nós que são números bons e alguns nem tantos, né? Na Europa, 500 mil DPOs registrados nas companhias. Ou seja, uma nova profissão surgindo aqui. Lá na Europa surgiu, aqui no Brasil também, uma grande oportunidade para quem quiser atuar nessa área. Outros números já são mais preocupantes, que são as questões do 89 mil notificações de data breach, 280 mil casos recebidos pelas autoridades nacionais, né? Então, para aqueles que ainda estão em estado de inércia, pensando naquela música, né, should I stay ou should I go, eu falo para vocês precisam ir, precisam implementar seus planos de governança, as boas práticas, porque agosto está logo aí e a Autoridade Nacional vai ser criada e nós teremos, as empresas terão muito trabalho e o tempo é curto para implementar LGPD nas suas companhias. Obrigado, Tony. Agora eu passo a palavra para a Corinna, que vai falar um pouquinho para nós sobre transferência internacional de dados e alguns aspectos do DPO, entre outras coisas. Fique à vontade.
Thank you very much. This is working very good. First of all, a big thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's my first sort of real time in Brazil, so I'm very much enjoying this. And thanks to Tony for such a great introduction, so I will happily build on that. Okay. One thought I wanted to start with, and it's, as I said, very much building on what you presented before, and something that is also very much sinking in now in Europe, is that data protection is not for the sake of protecting data. It is to protect the individual behind the data, and your video showed that very, very nicely. And this is something that we should always keep in mind also when sort of balancing the different interests and balancing the different provisions in data protection legislation, might it be GDPR or the Brazilian Act. I just wanted to give a very brief overview about what has changed compared from the 95 directive to the current regulation in Europe. Both are very principle-based. This has not changed, so you still have the principle of data minimization, purpose limitation. Obviously, you need a legal basis before you process data. This hasn't changed, but some aspects have. For example, we have now a risk-based approach enshrined in the new legislation. There are many new documentation requirements that came up. You illustrated that nicely. For us, very important, the role of the data processor has very much increased. For more risk-based processing, you need to do a privacy impact assessment before. And also the territorial scope has changed. I think this is probably also very important for the audience here in the room. And then aspects like breach notification and, of course, the enforcement was really a game changer. So I couldn't agree more with that. So with that, I'll move on to how we went about the GDPR and ensuring compliance. For us, the GDPR was more of an evolution than a revolution. As I said before, the 95 directive was around. All the underlying principles were already existing. So we already had certainly a certain compliance project already in place. For us, the provision on the data protection officer was very important. This was a concept that already existed in Germany, where you could also say this was mirrored in the GDPR. So that was our natural starting point, and I think it's actually a very good starting point that the law also was designing in a quite modern fashion as well. So we have our data protection officer. But, as you said, it's a multidisciplinary team, and I couldn't agree more with that. We obviously have attorneys and lawyers in the team, but in order to be able to really see through the process, because data protection and privacy does not exist just in the law on paper. You have to live it, you have to implement it. And data security is not the same thing, but it is very key, and that you can only do with the technical expertise. One other important feature we have is that we have auditors in the team, and we also decided to be certified by the British Standard Institute. Our entire process, our entire data protection management system is also audited. Having said this, this is still a relatively small team. It's a team of experts, technical, legal, and also auditors, who need to work towards the compliance in the company. And that is still a very difficult task. So you really need to convince every line of business that this is very important and that they have to put a long thought process behind it and ensure compliance. And in there, again, it really helps that people understand that this is to protect the individual. Before, data protection was seen a bit of a geek theme, I would say. But now that also within the company, people understand that this is important to respect and protect the individual, that really helps. Because an experience we have is that you can try and control the process, but it's really better to pass the message like as an ambassador to make sure that people understand why this is done. Because you cannot breathe down everybody's neck. At some point, you need to roll out a compliance program, but the individual lines of businesses, might it be HR, marketing, research, they need to have their own process in place, and they also need to be able to walk and run then by themselves. You know, as you said, this doesn't end with one compliance program. It's a permanent progress that needs to be constantly also modernized. And there it is really better to make sure that the lines of businesses have their own in-house expertise and can make sure that only if they're really complex questions, they have to go back to the data protection team for guidance. But at some point, they should be autonomous in their way of making sure that they respect the data protection principles and rules. In addition, we obviously provide a lot of training and advice to the teams. We keep throughout all the business lines records of processing activities. And also very importantly, obviously, the technical and organizational measures in place but you can never, avoiding data breaches is very, very difficult, and they usually happen on Friday evenings. That's also a feature that we notice. And for the last point on my slide, obviously the GDPR is one piece of legislation, but not by far not the only one, and there are many other important ones. And so we also have a network of local and global privacy coordinators to make sure that this all comes together, to also ensure local compliance. I think for the sake of time, I'll skip over this slide. But as I said, you know, we monitor very closely all the upcoming legislations and try to be as prepared as possible for that. I wanted to mention one for us very important aspect, that is international data transfers. Not so much has changed under the GDPR. I think what is very important to notice is that the GDPR does not provide for data localization requirements. We would describe it as that the data protection standard that is set by the GDPR needs to travel with the data if the data moves abroad, especially if it's a country that doesn't have an adequacy status. In that respect, we mostly use European model clauses for that because we find that a tool that suits our business very well. Having said that, we still think that under the GDPR, we need to have a discussion about data transfers. We feel that there's one specific part missing, which is the processor-to-processor transfers, where we are nudging the European Commission a little bit that they come up with the new feature in the toolbox that is already there. Having said that, for us also the GDPR is not written in stone, right? It's very, very important that we have a continuous dialogue also on pieces that are missing. And again, for the international data transfers, we think that we need to have a discussion also about modernizing the tools. You know, it should not be written in stone. And that brings me actually already to my last slide. Tony, you said the GDPR is in place for a bit over a year, which is actually true. It's been in force now for over a year, but it was adopted in 2016, and which makes it by next year 4 years. So the review, which is foreseen in the law, is coming up. It's not going to, as we understand it, it's not going to be a formal review that the legal text is going to be changed. But nevertheless, it is really to look at the different provisions and have a stock-taking exercise with the European Commission, the European Data Protection Board, the national data protection authorities, and obviously the stakeholders who have to be compliant with the law, to really look at what has worked and what hasn't worked. One area that they're going to address actually very quickly in November already is to look at the data's subject rights and how are they being enforced. And as you mentioned already, there has been a bit of, we felt a bit of, it was over the top, a bit of, I wouldn't call it abuse, but it goes into that direction, that stakeholders would use it for other reasons than data protection in order to have an entry point into getting entire copies of data sets. So this is something that we've clearly flagged to both the European Commission and the European Data Protection Board as a concern, that we think this needs to be rebalanced a little bit. Breach notification, I think the authorities themselves see that they get so many notifications and that we need to bring in the risk-based approach to really say, please make sure we focus on what matters. Is there really a risk for the individual behind it, or does it only concern a data set that was very well protected, encrypted, and so on? So we think that there is clearly, will be focus on that still this year. For us, very important, but there we are also sure that we're going to see a debate there, is the balance between the GDPR, the provisions, and new technologies, really to make sure, and certainly the GDPR was not designed in a way to block innovation, but still we need to have a debate about it. To what extent could it be a stumbling block? And we think that there's still a lot of room for maneuver in terms of looking at privacy-enhancing technologies. How can you move the needle on the technological front to combine the legislation with more technical protection and make sure that maybe you can become a bit lighter on certain obligations. And what we also see very clearly is going forward the combined debate of artificial intelligence, the ethical principles, and the GDPR. And we really believe that it's very, very crucial to understand to what extent the GDPR can help on that front. There are already many, many principles enshrined there with respect to transparency, fairness, but also automated decision-making. So our call in that respect is really to the European Commission to say, let's do a gap analysis when it comes to regulating new technologies. Let's please understand what is already out there and make sure that we also move the GDPR to a modern framework that is enabling both the protection of the individual and the growth of and prosperity through new technologies. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, Corinna. E, mais uma vez, como o Tony fez, a Corinna ressaltou a questão da implementação multidisciplinar da GDPR e também do LGPD. Aqui no Brasil, a gente ainda pensa muito que contratando um escritório de advocacia você resolve todos os seus problemas de LGPD. Não, você vai resolver uma pequena parte do seu problema. A implementação é muito maior que simplesmente as questões jurídicas, tem as questões técnicas para serem implementadas, segurança da informação, processos, o envolvimento de todas as áreas da empresa. Isso eles destacaram bastante nos dois painéis. E muito bom, gostei muito da apresentação da Corinna. Agora, dou a palavra à Cristina Montgomery para continuar a nossa apresentação aqui no nosso painel. Obrigado.
Hi, thank you. So I'm going to cover today IBM's approach to privacy and data protection and how we've evolved that approach in light of GDPR and the new data privacy regulations that are coming up around the world, like LGPD. And I'm also going to discuss a few points about what we're hoping to see in DPAs as we move from the enactment of privacy legislation to the enforcement of privacy legislation. So at IBM, privacy is really a matter of trust, not a matter of law. I mean, we've been earning the trust of our clients for over 100 years. We've been operating in Brazil for 102 years. So we really have a valued and principle-based approach to privacy that's centered on trust. In today's increasingly data-driven world, organizations have been challenged to operate in light of emerging regulations around data privacy and data protection. For IBM, we're a data-driven business. We always have been. So we've got long-standing values and principles around our approach to privacy. And our most recent instantiation of those principles is shown on this slide, around trust and transparency. There's a link here to them if you want to see them and read about them in more detail on our website. I'm just going to touch on them very briefly here. The first thing I'll talk about is data and our approach to data. So IBM believes that data and insights belong to the creators of that data. Our client agreements are very transparent on this point. We are clear that we won't use client data without client permission. And if we do use client data, we make it clear in the agreement what we'll use it for, and we limit our use to the purposes that are set forth in the client agreement. We fundamentally believe that we need to protect the privacy of our clients' data. And from a data security perspective, we're one of the world's largest enterprise security companies. And so we're continually developing new innovations to protect our clients, their data, and global trade from cybersecurity threats. One of the principles also addressed IBM's approach to AI, so two foundational beliefs that we have with respect to artificial intelligence. The first is that artificial intelligence should augment, not replace humans. And the second is that AI systems have to be transparent and explainable. And this comes back to trust as well. So we really do believe that if clients are going to trust and consumers are going to trust artificial intelligence, they need to understand what data was used to train an AI system, who was involved in that training, and most importantly, how the algorithmic recommendation was arrived at. So trust is very important in the case of AI as well. So our principles and values-based approach has been foundational to IBM for years, as I mentioned, but with the implementation of GDPR, organizations around the world, and IBM was no exception, have been challenged to implement and improve and enhance our approach to data privacy and to make it more programmatic in nature. So I'm going to talk about some of the changes to our organizational structure in light of GDPR. We've been modifying that as well. I mean, we have 400,000 employees. We operate in 170 countries around the world. We have literally thousands of applications that use data and personal data that falls within the purview of data privacy regulations, and thousands of offerings as well. So how did we approach GDPR? And I'll talk about that a little bit further, but I also want to address the fact that we appointed a chief privacy officer more than 20 years ago. And just recently, with my appointment into the role 2 months ago, back in August timeframe, we moved the chief privacy office from the legal function into the business. And this gives us and reflects the evolving approach that we've taken to data privacy from a compliance-oriented approach to really a strategic, business-led and business-driven approach to privacy, embedding privacy within the fabric of the business. You see here on this slide 2 organizations that are very closely tied, and I know the other speaker spoke about the need for organizational working and the importance of the business with respect to privacy. And so these 2 organizations are very closely connected now to the Chief Privacy Office. They always have been, but now from an organizational perspective, we've enhanced our approach. So the Global Chief Data Office, for one, is responsible for building data trust into the fabric of IBM's own data, and then applying transparent AI to enhance the value of that data. We work very closely with the Global Chief Data Office here in the CPO, the Chief Privacy Office. And then Enterprise and Technology Security Organization. They're responsible for security and privacy compliance of all IBM's offerings. They're also responsible for cybersecurity for the company. So my organization now, the Chief Privacy Office, is a sister organization to our security organization. We report to the same senior vice president, senior level in the company that's responsible for security and privacy globally. That senior vice president chairs something called the Privacy Advisory Council, or the PAC. The PAC is made up of senior vice presidents across the company, and they provide governance oversight. So we've really adopted a programmatic, high-level approach to privacy with oversight at the top, but also very important is a bottoms-up approach to privacy, so tops down and bottoms up. As some of the other speakers mentioned, you need the buy-in of the business, and the business really needs to own and be accountable for privacy in their respective business units. So, again, the business units own compliance, and my office provides the tools that they need in working with the Global Chief Data Office and in working with Enterprise and Technology Security to make it easy for them to comply and also to monitor accountability at the business unit level. My office is also responsible for AI ethics. That's a new mission for the Chief Privacy Office, and we are implementing a centralized governance and review process for AI ethics related practices and policies and offerings across the company. Together with the Enterprise and Technology Security Organization that I mentioned earlier, we support internal application owners at IBM and product and offering teams in understanding and applying regulations to their businesses. This slide is an example of how we do that. This is our Industry Regulatory and Compliance Program. And it starts with an assessment led by, in the case of LGPD, the country general manager and the local team. So we really discovered that we needed to, in the face of all the emerging regulations, we really needed to be more systemic in our approach. Again, I mentioned thousands of tools and thousands of owners of tools that process and control data and handle data throughout IBM, many product and offering teams throughout IBM. So with GDPR, we made our process much more programmatic, but we knew that we needed to repeat that process and simplify and build upon that process as new regulations get implemented around the globe. How we did that for LGPD is essentially sat down initially with the country general manager and the local team in Brazil. And what we tried to do is to adapt a lot of the toolkits that we put in place to get GDPR compliant and work with the legal teams to fully understand what needed to be changed, enhanced, et cetera, in light of LGPD's modifications to GDPR. And then to roll out the education in the form of not only internal tools, working with the Chief Data Office, but guidance documents, working with the legal teams and the business teams so that local application owners and business owners and product and offering teams could understand what they needed to do in their respective organizations with respect to their privacy, their applications and their offerings. I just want to make a couple of points on DPAs. So as we move now into, at least in Europe, the enforcement phase, and as in Brazil, we start to think about the establishment of a DPA, 2 points I want to make here. One is around organizational accountability, and the other is around the need to ensure the global integration of enforcement mechanisms. This is really necessary in order to continue to promote competitive trade flows, innovations in the business. So the importance of this as GDPR and regulations go into effect around the world. As a large multinational corporation, we strongly believe that DPAs should encourage organizational accountability. Companies, organizational accountability has been an important principle, and it's an important component of privacy legislation and regulations around the globe. And companies, responsible companies, have really made it the hallmark of and the base of their privacy programs, and IBM has done that. We think it's a key building block, right? And we would ask that DPAs DPAs should expect that responsible companies enact certain practices to demonstrate that they are accountable. Accountability puts the responsibility upon the entity that is handling and collecting the data. And so there's no reason why, if a company is going to do that, it shouldn't be enacting responsible practices with respect to data. So what are some things DPAs can look for in companies to ensure organizational accountability? We think they can look at some of the things highlighted on this chart, like is a company implementing risk mitigation and controls that go over and above what the law requires? Is the company enacting privacy into its code of ethics? At IBM, we have privacy-related aspects to our business conduct guidelines. Our employees are responsible for certifying to those guidelines on an annual basis. We also provide privacy-related education that's mandatory every year, cybersecurity education that's also mandatory. And we think that voluntary certifications and codes of conduct to enable the free flow of data as we do across our organization that sits in many countries or with our business partners. We've adapted processes internally to ensure that we're complying with law from an organizational accountability perspective. And we also believe that DPA should ensure the global integration of an enforcement regime as we move forward. We really need to protect cross-border data flows. They're becoming increasingly important and essential in a data-driven economy. So there's lots of things and lots of ways that I know Brazil can approach this. Brazil has laid a tremendous foundation for enhancing the free flow of data on a global basis through enabling the implementation of things like standard contractual clauses and seals and certificates. And so there's a really good foundation there on which to build upon. We also think that there are some great privacy frameworks. APEX CBPR is an effective mechanism to combine privacy protection with innovation based on stimulating responsible data flows. Brazil could be the first country that's not a part of APEC to implement CBPR. We think that that's something that should be considered looking forward, and we would support that. And then in promoting trade dialogue that's focused on 21st century digital economies, there are some things that we would also ask that DPAs look at and look for. The first is to ensure that there's a dialogue around things like government cooperation for regulatory best practices for cybersecurity, and then things to avoid, like prohibit requirements that would inhibit trust in companies, like requiring companies to disclose source code or encryption keys to governments. That will reduce the trust in companies, and that's something that we're hopeful DPAs will avoid as they enforce data privacy legislation going forward. And then what's next? At IBM, we're looking at and applying our values and principles-based approach to AI ethics. We think, and Corinna mentioned the same thing, this is an area that's going to be a really hot topic across the globe. We're going to take that same approach that we've applied to data protection and apply it in the context of AI ethics, again, with trust at the core. The bar on trust is getting raised every day, and we believe that we need to keep adapting from an organizational perspective, from a strategic perspective, to ensure that we continue to earn the trust of our clients here in Brazil and around the globe for another 100 years. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina. Dois pontos de destaque aqui na apresentação da Cristina, muito interessantes, que é a estrutura da IBM na questão de privacidade e proteção de dados. Isso demonstra a preocupação da companhia num assunto tão sério, que deve ser seguido por todos. E a questão da autoridade nacional. Pontos muito interessantes que foram trazidos pela Cristina. E nós entendemos também que a autoridade nacional aqui no Brasil tem que ser parceira do controlador e do operador, não uma adversária, né? Porque, dependendo da atuação da autoridade nacional aqui, pode inviabilizar o crescimento de empresas, investimentos, ainda mais na nossa área aqui, que vai ser muito afetada com a nova legislação que está por vir, né? Bom, para finalizar, eu tenho 3 perguntas aqui que eu recebi via WhatsApp. Vou fazer uma para cada convidado. Vamos ver, vou escolher uma aqui para... Deixa eu ver para o Tony. Tony, quais os desafios que você enfrentou para implementar a regulamentação do GDPR na sua companhia?
Well, it's a bit hard to answer because I was not responsible for that. So I was responsible for doing it with my clients. So.
Okay, I can change to Corinna.
Sorry.
Is it on? Yeah, I think I could actually answer the same. No, but the thing is, I actually negotiated really the GDPR for SAP, and I was very much involved in then sort of transposing it, because I worked very, very closely with our data protection and privacy team. And I think the biggest challenge is really, as I mentioned before, to ensure that people in the company understand the importance and also understand their own responsibility in the process, and not always, and I guess Christina can sing a song about that, about always this notion of turning back to the data protection and privacy team and say, you need to explain this to us. Why, you know, and how do we need to implement it? And please let us just do baby steps. And you know, you need to sort of hold our hand throughout the entire way. And the importance of the role of a DPO is really to work towards compliance, to make everybody understand. But the lines of businesses need to be able to be autonomous and walk by themselves and understand why this matters. And once this is sinking in, then it gets better. But first of all, to convince them that, you know, this is not the geek stuff from 15 years ago. No, it's very important, and they should pay close attention.
Ok, thank you, Corinna. Tony, dentro da corporação, quem você entende que pode ser DPO?
Who can be a DPO? Oh. It's an interesting question, because a DPO needs to have, if it's one person, it needs to have a lot of capabilities. So first of all, you need to understand the law. So that say you should be a lawyer. Then you need to understand cybersecurity. We just explained that fines are coming from data protection, and that might have a big impact. So you need to at least understand some technical stuff, which should say, well, you're a tech guy. Then you need to, as Christina is saying, you need to convince the business. So you need to be a really strong communicator. And then in the last, if something goes wrong, then you also need to be a judge saying, well, this is not good enough, and I'm going to escalate up to the board and say, guys, there is something not going well here. So it's 4 different capabilities which are not really aligned. So it depends a lot on the company culture, what would be the best DPO. I'm a bit, but that's more my personal opinion, a bit hesitant if the DPO sits too much in the legal function. I mean, that's already explained, moving it out of and into, we see that now more often happening, so moving it to the CDO, the data office, does make much more sense, because the risk is if it's too much in legal, you end up, and a few weeks ago I had this legal discussion between 2 of my clients. At the end, it's all legal principle, and it never ended, a never-ending discussion. I mean, at the end, we still need to do business, and at the end, we still need to do, there's another day and another client. So we need to be realistic. We have the opportunity to do a risk-based approach and not end in all kind of theoretical legal discussions, which is sometimes the risk if it's too much legal-oriented. But you have also a lot of good legal people which are able to bridge legal and business. So.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Cristina? Após esse 1 ano e 4 meses de vigência do GDPR, como você entende que a Autoridade Nacional de Proteção de Dados tem agido na Europa? Um caráter educativo ela tem dado nesse primeiro ano, ou um caráter mais fiscalizatório, autuando empresas e sobre algumas infrações de privacidade?
So I know IBM is working with authorities in Europe to encourage an educational-based approach. But there have been some big fines, and Tony spoke about them. And I think, one thing to note about the fines so far have been focused on data breaches. So a data breach that caused the Data Protection Authority to look very closely at a company and at a company's program. So they've really have been sort of focused at this point at bad actors and bad practices. That's not necessarily a bad thing for a company that is taking the guidance to heart. We would ask, though, and we've been doing that with regulators and data protection authorities around the globe, that, again, the important thing is education at this point in time. So I think it's sort of been balanced, again, with the big fines really being started as a result of a big breach.
Ok, very good news. Pessoal, chegamos ao final do nosso painel. Eu fiquei muito feliz e, a partir de agora, sou fã dessa time de privacidade e proteção de dados. Obrigado mais uma vez pela presença de vocês. Foi muito enriquecedor para nós aqui no Brasil ouvir a experiência de vocês na questões de privacidade, proteção de dados e GDPR. E espero que todos tenham gostado. E agora nós vamos seguir com o nosso evento. Muito obrigado a todos.
Som. Muito obrigada a todos vocês. Podem se sentar. Vai fazer uma foto? Ah, legal. Uma foto aqui, todo mundo juntinho. Picture.